Clara Whitmore's heart stopped the moment the stranger stepped off the train, tall, armed, and nothing like the gentle words she'd memorized from months of letters. The revolver at his hip caught the afternoon sun like a promise of violence, and when his cold eyes met hers across the platform, she knew with bone-deep certainty. The man she'd agreed to marry was dead, and this ghost-wearing gunmetal had come to collect his debts. In a town where women disappeared into bad marriages like stones into deep water, Clara had one choice left: trust the wrong man or lose everything by morning. Welcome to a story of survival, deception, and the dangerous line between protection and possession. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Clara's journey travels. And if this story grabs you, hit that like button and stay until the end. You won't believe where this takes us. The train's whistle cut through Benton Falls like a knife through silk, sharp, clean, final. Clara Whitmore stood on the platform with her gloved hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white beneath the worn fabric. September sun beat down on the raw timber buildings lining the single dirt street, turning the air thick and golden. Dust motes danced in the light. Somewhere behind her, the blacksmith's hammer rang against an anvil in steady, indifferent rhythm. She'd worn her mother's blue dress, the only good thing she owned that hadn't been sold or pawned. The fabric smelled faintly of lavender from the sachet she'd tucked in her trunk 3 months ago, back when hope had still felt like something solid. Back when James Mackenzie's letters had arrived every 2 weeks like clockwork, written in careful script that spoke of partnership and respect, of a life built together on good land with clean water. "I'm not a romantic man," he'd written in the letter she'd read so many times the paper had gone soft at the creases. "But I'm honest, and I'm kind, and I'll never raise my hand to you. That's a promise I'll keep till I'm in the ground." She'd believed him. God help her, she'd believed every word. The train hissed to a stop, brakes shrieking, steam billowing across the platform in white clouds that smelled of coal and hot metal. Clara's pulse hammered in her throat. Around her, the usual small crowd had gathered, ranch hands waiting for supply deliveries, Mrs. Henderson collecting her sister from Cheyenne, old Tom Farrell, who met every train just to see faces from somewhere else. The passenger car door opened. A man stepped down. Clara's breath caught, not with joy, but with the sick, plummeting sensation of the ground disappearing beneath her feet. This wasn't James. The man who descended to the platform was taller than James had described himself, broader through the shoulders, with a hard leanness that spoke of missed meals and long days in the saddle. He wore dark clothes, black trousers, a charcoal shirt, a leather vest that had seen years of weather. But it was the gun that drew every eye. A Colt revolver rode low on his right hip in a worn holster, the grip polished smooth from use, positioned for a quick draw. His face was angular, shadowed beneath the brim of his hat, all sharp planes and harder edges. A few days of stubble darkened his jaw. When he lifted his head and his gaze swept the platform, Clara saw eyes the color of winter sky, pale and cold and measuring. Those eyes found hers and stopped. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The platform sounds seemed to fade, the steam, the voices, the distant hammer. Clara felt stripped bare under that stare, assessed and catalogued in the space of 3 heartbeats. Then he picked up his saddlebags and started walking toward her. Every instinct Clara possessed screamed at her to run. This man moved like violence contained, each step deliberate, controlled. The crowd parted without seeming to think about it, a subconscious recognition of danger. Mrs. Henderson gathered her skirts and stepped back. Tom Farrell's rheumy eyes narrowed with suspicion. The stranger stopped 6 feet away, close enough that Clara could see the dust on his boots, the faint scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the way his right hand stayed loose and ready near his gun even standing still. "Clara Whitmore." His voice was low, rough-edged, not a question. She swallowed hard, forced herself to meet his eyes. "Yes. I'm Ethan Hale." He didn't offer his hand. "James Mackenzie sent me." The bottom dropped out of Clara's world. "Sent you?" The words came out barely above a whisper. "Where is he?" Something flickered across Ethan Hale's face. Too fast to read, too complicated to name. He glanced at the watching crowd, then back at her. "We should talk somewhere private." "No." Clara's voice cracked, but she didn't care. Her hands were shaking now, and she pressed them against her stomach to still them. "No, you tell me now. Where's James?" Ethan's jaw tightened. The muscles in his face went rigid, and for a moment she saw something almost human in his expression. Regret, maybe, or the ghost of it. "He's dead, ma'am. Died 3 weeks ago. Fever took him fast." The words hit like physical blows. Claire's vision narrowed, darkened at the edges. Someone behind her, Mrs. Henderson probably, made a soft sound of sympathy. The platform tilted slightly, and Clara locked her knees to keep from swaying. "Before he died," Ethan continued, his voice still that same low, careful tone, "he asked me to come in his place, to honor the arrangement, to help you keep your land." Claire's laugh came out harsh, broken. "Honor the arrangement?" She heard her voice rising and couldn't stop it. "The arrangement was marriage to James Mackenzie, not to some—" She gestured at him, at the gun, at everything he represented. "Some stranger with a gun." "I know." Ethan's expression didn't change. "But James knew what you were facing, the foreclosure, the debts. He knew you needed help, and he knew I was the only person he could trust to give it." "I don't even know you." "No, ma'am, you don't." The simple agreement, spoken without defensiveness or argument, somehow made it worse. Clara pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting for control. Everything she'd built in her mind over the past 3 months, the careful hope, the cautious plans, the vision of a partnership with a good man who'd written about planting apple trees and building a new barn, all of it crumbled like ash. "Why would he send you?" she managed finally. "Because I owed him my life." Ethan shifted his weight, the first uncertain movement she'd seen from him. "And because he thought I might be able to make something different of mine. He was probably wrong about that, but he wasn't wrong about you needing help." Clara looked at him, really looked, trying to see past the gun and the hard eyes to whatever James had seen. But all she saw was danger. A man shaped by violence, carrying it with him like a second skin. "I can't." She shook her head, backing up a step. "I can't marry a stranger. I can't—" "The foreclosure comes due when?" The question, flat and practical, cut through her rising panic. 2 weeks, she whispered. "And you have the money?" Clara's silence was answer enough. Ethan nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something he already knew. "Then you have 2 choices, Miss Whitmore. You can marry me, a legal marriage, on paper, nothing more. And I'll pay your debts and work your land through the winter. Or you can refuse, and in 2 weeks the bank takes everything. Your choice." "That's not a choice." "No, ma'am. I suppose it isn't." The honesty of it, the blunt acknowledgement that this was coercion dressed up as an option, somehow made it bearable. At least he wasn't pretending. At least he wasn't coating the poison with sugar. Clara looked past him at the train, already preparing for departure. The conductor checked his pocket watch. Steam hissed from the engine. She could get on that train right now, leave Benton Falls and the farm and the debts and the whole impossible situation behind. Start over somewhere else with nothing but her mother's dress and $23 in her traveling bag. But the farm had been her father's. Her grandfather's before that. 3 generations of Whitmores planted in that soil, and she was the last. The absolute last. She looked back at Ethan Hale and saw him watching her with those winter eyes, waiting with the patience of a man accustomed to hard truths. "What exactly are you proposing?" Clara forced the words out steady. "A legal marriage. Your name and mine on the certificate. I pay your debts. James left me money for that purpose. I work the farm through spring. We live under the same roof, but separate. I sleep in the barn. You keep the house. I don't touch you. I don't make demands. Come spring, if you want me gone, I'll go. And if I want you gone sooner, then I go sooner. But the debts still need paying, and the work still needs doing, and winter's coming whether you like it or not." Clara's throat felt tight. "Why would you do this? What do you get?" For the first time, something almost like emotion crossed Ethan's face. "A chance to be something other than what I am. Maybe. James thought it was possible." He paused. "I'm not sure he was right." The train whistle blew. 1 minute to departure. Clara closed her eyes, saw her father's grave on the hill behind the house, the wooden cross she'd carved herself because she couldn't afford stone, saw her mother's garden, gone to weeds now, but still holding the shape of careful hands, saw the barn her grandfather had raised, the fence line her father had walked every morning, the land that held every memory she had of being loved. She opened her eyes. "If we do this," she said, and her voice only shook a little, "there are rules." Ethan nodded once. "Name them." "You sleep in the barn like you said. You don't come in the house after dark unless there's emergency. You don't touch me, don't even think about it. And the first time you break your word, the first time you make me afraid in my own home, I'll shoot you myself." The corner of Ethan's mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent to respect. "You have a gun?" "My father's rifle. I know how to use it." "Good." He meant it. "Anything else?" Clara thought of the letters, the careful words, the promises James had made, the future she'd let herself imagine. "Don't pretend to be him," she said quietly. "Don't try to be what he would have been. I don't want lies." Ethan's face went still. "No, ma'am. No lies." The train lurched, beginning to move. The conductor swung aboard the last car. "Then I guess we have an arrangement." Clara forced herself to extend her hand. Ethan looked at it for a long moment before taking it. His grip was firm, calloused, careful not to squeeze too hard. His skin was warm despite the coldness in his eyes. "I'll do right by you," he said. "That's a promise." Clara withdrew her hand, resisting the urge to wipe her palm on her dress. "The Reverend's house is on Oak Street. We can do this now and get it over with." "Yes, ma'am." She turned toward town without waiting to see if he followed. Behind her, she heard his boots on the platform boards, steady and sure. The watching crowd parted again, and Clara kept her spine straight and her chin up as she walked past their staring faces. Mrs. Henderson caught her arm gently. "Clara, dear, are you certain?" "I'm certain I don't have another choice." Clara pulled free, not ungently. "But thank you for your concern." The walk to Reverend Michael's house took 10 minutes. Clara spent it acutely aware of the man walking 3 paces behind her, not closing the distance but never falling back. The sun beat down. Dust kicked up from their footsteps. A dog barked somewhere. Normal sounds in a day that had become surreal. The Reverend's house sat back from the street, painted white with green shutters, and a small garden where his wife grew herbs. Clara had been here a dozen times for church socials and prayer meetings. It had always felt welcoming. Today the white paint looked stark as bone. Reverend Michaels answered her knock himself, his round face creasing with surprise and then concern as he took in Clara's expression and the armed stranger standing behind her. "Miss Whitmore, I wasn't expecting— Is everything all right?" "No, Reverend." Clara kept her voice level. "But I need you to perform a marriage. Now, if you're able." His eyebrows rose. "A marriage? My dear, this is rather—" His gaze shifted to Ethan, and his expression changed, grew wary. "Perhaps we should discuss this inside." The Reverend's study was small and book-lined, smelling of pipe tobacco and old paper. He gestured them to chairs, but Clara remained standing. Ethan took a position near the door, back to the wall, where he could see both of them, and the window. The movement looked instinctive. "Now then," Reverend Michaels settled into his desk chair with the careful deliberation of a man buying time to think. "Miss Whitmore, I must say this is highly irregular. You've had no banns read. There's been no courtship that I'm aware of." "James Mackenzie is dead," Clara interrupted. "This is Ethan Hale, his friend. James sent him to fulfill the marriage contract in his place. The foreclosure on my farm comes due in 2 weeks. This is the only way I keep the land." The Reverend's face softened with genuine sympathy. "Oh, my dear, I hadn't heard about James. I'm so very sorry." "Thank you." Clara swallowed against the tightness in her throat. "But sympathy won't pay the bank. I need this marriage legal and binding, today." Reverend Michaels looked at Ethan. "Young man, you understand what you're undertaking. Marriage is a sacred covenant, not a business arrangement." "I understand what I'm undertaking." Ethan's voice was flat, giving nothing away. "And you, Clara? You're entering this of your own free will?" Clara almost laughed. Free will? As if any of this had been her choice, as if she had any freedom left at all. Yes, she said. I'm sure. The Reverend studied them both for a long moment, his eyes troubled. Finally, he sighed and reached for a leather-bound book on his desk. Very well, but I'll need witnesses, and I'll need you both to understand that once this is done, it cannot be easily undone. In the eyes of the law and the church, you'll be man and wife. We understand, Clara said before Ethan could speak. Then I'll fetch Mrs. Michaels and our neighbor, Mr. Cooper. Wait here. When the door closed behind him, Clara finally allowed herself to sit. Her legs had started shaking. She sank into the nearest chair and pressed her hands flat on her thighs to still them. You can still leave. Ethan spoke from his position by the door, his voice quiet. Get on tomorrow's train. I'll give you money for passage. Clara shook her head without looking at him. The farm is mine. It's all I have left of them. I know. Do you? She lifted her head sharply. Do you know what it's like to be the last? To carry everything on your shoulders because there's no one else left to carry it? Ethan's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. Yeah, he said softly. I know exactly what that's like. Before Clara could respond, the door opened. Reverend Michaels returned with his wife, a plump, kind woman who'd brought Clara soup when her mother died, and Mr. Cooper, the banker who held her mortgage and probably knew to the penny how much she owed. Mrs. Michaels' eyes were damp with sympathy. Mr. Cooper's face was carefully neutral. The Reverend positioned himself behind his desk and opened his book. We are gathered here in the sight of witnesses to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony. His voice took on the formal cadence of ritual, words worn smooth by repetition. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted. Clara barely heard him. Her attention fixed on the book in his hands, the pages turning, the words flowing past like water. This wasn't how she'd imagined this moment. She'd thought there would be joy. Hope, at least. Some sense of beginning. Instead, there was only necessity. Survival dressed up in ceremony. Ethan Hale, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do. No hesitation, no emotion. Clara Whitmore, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? The words stuck in her throat. Clara forced them out. I do. Do you have rings? Clara shook her head. She hadn't even thought about rings. But Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 simple gold bands. They caught the afternoon light streaming through the window, plain, unadorned, practical. James had them made, he said, meeting Clara's stunned gaze. Sent them with me. Something inside Clara's chest cracked. James had known. He'd planned for this, prepared for it, even as fever took him. He'd thought of details like rings when he was dying. Her vision blurred. She blinked hard, refusing to cry in front of strangers. Ethan took her hand, gently, carefully, and slid the smaller ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Of course it did. James would have asked her ring size in one of his letters, some casual question she'd answered without thinking twice. With this ring, I thee wed. Ethan's voice was quiet. Clara took the other ring with trembling fingers and reached for Ethan's hand. His skin was warm, scarred along the knuckles. She slid the gold band onto his finger, feeling the roughness of calluses, the strength in his grip. With this ring, I thee wed. Her voice broke on the last word. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you man and wife. Reverend Michaels closed his book with finality. What has been joined here today, let no man put asunder. It was done. Clara was married to a stranger with cold eyes and a gun, bound by law and church, and desperation to a man she didn't know and wasn't sure she could trust. Mrs. Michaels hugged her, whispering consolation. Mr. Cooper shook Ethan's hand with professional efficiency. The Reverend produced papers to be signed. Clara's hand shook so badly her signature looked like a child's scrawl. When they stepped back out into the September sun, Clara wore a gold ring and a new name. The weight of both felt crushing. "We should go to the bank," Ethan said. "Get the debt settled." Clara nodded mutely and let him lead the way. The bank was mercifully empty. Mr. Cooper had returned ahead of them and stood behind the counter with the mortgage papers already spread out. He looked at Clara with something that might have been pity. "The total amount due, including interest, is $842.16, he said. It might as well have been $1 million. Clara had never seen that much money in her life. But Ethan reached into his coat and pulled out a leather wallet thick with bills. He counted out $900 in crisp notes and laid them on the counter. "That covers the mortgage and leaves a credit on the account," he said. "I'll need a receipt showing the debt paid in full." Mr. Cooper's eyebrows rose, but he nodded and began preparing the paperwork. The scratch of his pen seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet building. Clara stared at the money on the counter. "That's James's money?" "He saved it for you, for this." Ethan's expression was unreadable. He wanted you safe. The tears she'd been holding back finally broke free. Clara turned away, pressing her hand to her mouth, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She heard Mr. Cooper clear his throat uncomfortably, heard papers rustle. Then she felt a hand on her shoulder, light, tentative, ready to pull back. "I'm sorry," Ethan said quietly. "I know this isn't what you wanted." Clara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and straightened her spine. "No," she said, "but it's what I have." Mr. Cooper finished the papers and handed them across the counter. "The Whitmore farm is clear of debt, Mrs. Hale. Congratulations." Mrs. Hale. The name felt foreign, wrong. Clara folded the papers with careful precision and tucked them into her bag. "Thank you, Mr. Cooper." Outside, the sun had started its slow descent toward the western hills. Long shadows stretched across the street. Clara's wagon waited where she'd left it that morning, a lifetime ago, when she'd still believed in gentle men who wrote kind letters. "I'll drive," Ethan said. "You look worn out." Clara didn't argue. She climbed onto the wagon seat and folded her hands in her lap, staring at the gold band on her finger. Ethan settled beside her, taking up the reins with easy competence. He didn't sit too close, didn't crowd her space. The wagon lurched into motion. The farm lay 6 miles outside town, following the river road through stands of cottonwood and willow. Clara had driven this route so many times she could do it in her sleep. Every turn, every landmark, every place where the road washed out in spring. She didn't speak, and Ethan didn't try to force conversation. The silence between them felt heavy, but not hostile. More like two strangers sharing a stagecoach, bound for the same destination, but not the same future. The sun painted the hills gold and amber as they climbed into higher country. Aspens had started turning, their leaves bright yellow against dark pine. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals. The air smelled clean, sage and grass and the faint mineral tang of the river. This was home. This land. This light. This particular quality of air and sky. Clara had been born here, had buried both parents here, had sworn over their graves that she'd keep the land in the family no matter what. Well, she'd kept it, at a price she was still calculating. The farmhouse came into view as they crested the final rise, a simple structure of weathered wood with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Her grandfather had built it to last, and it had, through 3 generations and more storms than Clara could count. The barn stood off to the left, its roof sagging slightly on the north side where it needed repair. Pasture land rolled out beyond, down to the river line. It looked shabby now, through a stranger's eyes. Worn. Work starved. The fence needed mending. The garden had gone mostly to seed. The porch step her father had meant to fix still wobbled. Clara felt a flush of shame. This was what she'd brought Ethan Hale to. This was what James's money had bought. A rundown farm and a widow before she'd even been a wife. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and sat for a moment, taking in the property with those measuring eyes. "Good bones," he said finally. "Good land. Water access. This is worth saving." The simple statement, spoken without judgment, made Clara's throat tight again. "My grandfather built it. He built it smart. Ethan climbed down and came around to offer her his hand. Clara hesitated, then took it. His grip was steady as she stepped down, then released immediately. "I'll get my gear settled in the barn," he said. "You go on inside, it's been a long day." Clara nodded, suddenly exhausted down to her bones. "There's stew left from yesterday, and bread. Help yourself when you're hungry." "Thank you, ma'am." "Clara." The correction came automatically. "You can call me Clara. We're married, after all." Ethan's expression flickered. "Clara, then. And I'm Ethan. Not Sir, not Mr. Hale, just Ethan." "All right." Clara picked up her bag from the wagon bed. "Ethan?" She walked to the house without looking back, but she felt his gaze following her. The front door stuck. It always stuck in fall when the wood swelled, and she had to put her shoulder against it. Inside, everything was exactly as she'd left it that morning. The kitchen table where she'd eaten breakfast. The rocking chair where her mother had sat to mend. The photographs on the mantel above the cold fireplace. But everything felt different now. Changed by the presence of a stranger in the barn, a gold ring on her finger, a name that wasn't quite hers yet. Clara set her bag down and went to the window. Through the wavy glass, she could see Ethan leading the horse toward the barn, moving with quiet efficiency. He disappeared inside, and a moment later, lamplight glowed from the open door. She touched the ring on her finger, turning it slowly. Thought of James Mackenzie, who she'd never met and now never would. Thought of his last thoughts, his final wishes, the friend he'd trusted with his dying breath. And she thought of the man in the barn, Ethan Hale, with his gun and his ghosts and his dangerous eyes, who'd promised to make her farm safe. Whether he'd promised to make her safe from him remained to be seen. Clara turned away from the window and began building a fire in the kitchen stove. Whatever tomorrow brought, tonight she'd sleep in her own bed under her own roof, and that was something. That was enough. For now. Outside, the last light faded from the sky. Stars emerged one by one, cold and distant and certain. The barn lamp burned steady, and somewhere in the darkness, an owl called, a sound like loneliness made audible. Clara banked the fire, locked the doors, and climbed the stairs to her room. She undressed in the dark, hung her mother's blue dress carefully in the wardrobe, and slipped between sheets that smelled of lavender and solitude. The ring clinked softly against the iron bed frame as she settled her hand on the pillow. Mrs. Clara Hale. God help her. She closed her eyes and waited for sleep that was a long time coming. Dawn came cold and gray, pressing against the bedroom window like an unwelcome visitor. Clara woke to the sound of an axe biting into wood, steady, rhythmic, relentless. She lay still for a moment, disoriented, before memory crashed back. The train platform, the Reverend's study, the gold ring that had twisted around her finger during the night. She was married to a stranger. Clara dressed quickly in her work clothes, a plain brown skirt and white shirtwaist, sturdy boots her father had resoled twice. Her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand showed dark circles under her eyes, her hair escaping its braid and pale wisps. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who'd slept poorly and woken to an impossible situation. The axe sounds continued outside. Clara went downstairs, her hand trailing along the banister her grandfather had carved from a single piece of oak. In the kitchen, she found the stove already lit, the fire burning clean and hot. A pot of coffee sat warming on the back burner. She hadn't made coffee this morning. Clara poured a cup with hands that weren't quite steady and went to the window. Through the glass, she could see Ethan in the yard, splitting wood with mechanical precision. He'd removed his coat despite the morning chill, working in his shirt sleeves. The axe rose and fell, each strike splitting logs clean through. Already he'd built a pile twice the size of what she'd managed to accumulate over the past month. He hadn't been joking about working the farm. Clara drank her coffee and watched him work, trying to reconcile the man swinging the axe with the armed stranger who'd stepped off the train. In daylight, without the gun visible, he looked almost ordinary. Almost. But there was still something in the way he moved, economical, alert, like a man who'd learned to conserve energy and expect trouble in equal measure. She needed to go out there, needed to establish some kind of understanding about how this arrangement would work. But her feet stayed rooted to the kitchen floor, reluctant to cross that threshold into whatever came next. The decision was made for her when Ethan set down the axe and looked directly at the kitchen window. Even from this distance, she could see him register her presence. He picked up his coat, shrugged into it, and started walking toward the house. Clara's pulse kicked up. She set down her coffee cup and moved to the door, opening it before he could knock. They faced each other across the threshold, neither quite inside, neither quite out. "Morning," Ethan said. His breath misted in the cold air. "Morning." Clara kept her voice steady. "Thank you for the coffee." Seemed like the least I could do. He glanced past her into the kitchen, then back to her face. "I didn't come in, just reached through the door to set the pot on the stove." She heard what he wasn't saying. "I kept my word. I didn't cross the line." "I appreciate that." Clara stepped back slightly. "Are you hungry? I can make breakfast." "I can make my own. Don't want to be a burden." "You're paying off my mortgage and splitting my firewood. The least I can do is cook." The words came out sharper than she'd intended. Clara took a breath and tried again. "I mean, we should probably talk about how this is going to work." Ethan nodded once. "All right." Clara opened the door wider. "Then come in. I'll make eggs." He wiped his boots carefully on the mat before entering, and even then he stayed close to the door, as if ready to leave at the first sign he wasn't welcome. Clara busied herself at the stove, cracking eggs into a pan, slicing bread. The silence between them felt thick, loaded with all the things they hadn't said yesterday. "There's 3 hens left," Clara said, focusing on the sizzling eggs. "Used to be a dozen, but I had to sell most of them last spring. They're not laying much now with winter coming. I saw them in the coop. I'll build up your flock come spring if you want." "With what money?" "I have some saved. James gave me the mortgage payment, but I've got my own stake too." Clara flipped the eggs with more force than necessary. "I don't want your money, Ethan. This arrangement is already—" She stopped, searching for the right word. "Unequal," he supplied quietly. "Yes?" "Then let me work for my keep. I'll improve the farm, build value. When spring comes and I leave, you'll have something better than what you started with." Clara turned to face him, spatula still in hand. "You keep saying when you leave, like it's certain. Isn't it?" Ethan's pale eyes met hers without flinching. "You didn't marry me because you wanted a husband, Clara. You married me because you needed money and labor. Come spring, you won't need those things anymore. Or if you do, you'll have options you don't have now." The brutal honesty of it stole her breath. "And you, what do you get out of leaving?" Something dark crossed his face. "Peace of mind that I kept a promise to a dying friend, and maybe the knowledge that for once in my life I did something that didn't end in blood." The weight of those words settled heavy in the kitchen. Clara turned back to the stove, plating the eggs with trembling hands. She set one plate on the table, then another across from it. "Sit," she said. Ethan hesitated, then pulled out a chair. He sat carefully, as if the furniture might break beneath him. When Clara joined him, she noticed he'd chosen the seat facing the door, his back to the wall. Old habits, probably. The kind that kept dangerous men alive. They ate in silence for several minutes. The eggs were good. Clara had always been a decent cook, even when ingredients were scarce. She watched Ethan eat with the focused efficiency of someone who'd known real hunger, cleaning his plate methodically. "It's good," he said when he noticed her watching. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Clara set down her fork. "We need rules. Real ones, beyond what we said yesterday." "I'm listening." She'd thought about this half the night, lying awake in the dark. "I'll cook breakfast and dinner. You're on your own for midday. I'll do washing for both of us. No sense wasting water and soap on separate loads. But you're responsible for your own mending." Ethan nodded. "Fair enough. The barn is yours. I won't go in without permission. The house is mine. Same courtesy." "Agreed." "If you need tools or supplies, tell me first. I know what we have and what we can spare." Clara's voice hardened slightly. "And I know what things cost. I won't have you throwing money at problems without discussion. You want to approve purchases. I want to be consulted. This is still my farm, Ethan, my decisions." For the first time, something like approval flickered across his face. "Your farm, your rules. I'm just hired help who happens to sleep in the barn." "Exactly." Clara felt some of the tension in her shoulders ease. As long as we're clear on that. We're clear. Ethan pushed back from the table and carried his plate to the wash basin. What needs doing first? Clara rose and went to the window, looking out at the property in morning light. Everything, she said honestly. The north fence is down in 3 places. The barn roof needs patching before snow. The well pump sticks. The chickens need a better coop. The pasture needs clearing. She stopped, overwhelmed by the list. Take a breath, Ethan said quietly. He'd moved to stand beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. We don't fix everything in a day. What's the priority? What fails first if we don't address it? Clara forced herself to think practically. The barn roof. If it leaks worse, we lose hay storage. And the well pump, we need water. Then that's where I start. Roof first, then the pump. Ethan pulled on his coat. I saw lumber stacked behind the barn. Enough to work with? Should be. My father bought it 2 years ago, meant to make repairs before... She stopped. Before he died, Ethan finished gently. It's all right to say it. Clara's throat tightened. Before he died, she repeated. There's tar paper too, and nails. He was always careful about supplies. Sounds like he was a good man. He was. Clara blinked hard against sudden tears. He would have hated this. Hated that I had to. She gestured vaguely between them, unable to articulate the shame of it. Maybe, Ethan said. Or maybe he would have been grateful someone was here to help. Parents want their children safe, Clara. However that happens. The understanding in his voice surprised her. Clara looked at him more closely, seeing past the hard exterior to something underneath. You lost your parents? A long time ago. He moved toward this door, clearly done with the conversation. I'll be working on the roof if you need me. Won't come down except for water breaks. Ethan, Clara stopped him before he could leave. What did James tell you about me? He turned back, his hand on the doorframe. He said you were brave. Said you'd stayed on this land alone after both your parents died because you loved it more than you feared loneliness. Said you deserved a partner who'd work beside you, not a master who'd work you. Ethan's expression softened almost imperceptibly. He wasn't wrong. Then he was gone, the door closing quietly behind him. Clara stood in the empty kitchen, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. She touched the ring on her finger, James's ring, now hers, and wondered what kind of man inspired that kind of loyalty. What kind of man made another promise to honor vows he'd never lived to speak. Outside, she heard Ethan climbing onto the barn roof, his footsteps sure despite the pitch. Then the sound of work beginning, boards being lifted, nails being driven, the steady rhythm of repair. Clara cleaned the breakfast dishes and tried not to think about the fact that for the first time in 2 years, she wasn't facing the work alone. The morning passed in a strange new rhythm. Clara worked in the house, sweeping, washing, mending a tear in her winter coat. Through the windows, she could track Ethan's progress on the roof. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd done this kind of work before, measuring twice, cutting once, fitting boards with precision. Around noon, he climbed down and went to the well. Clara watched from the kitchen as he examined the pump, working the handle experimentally. It stuck halfway up, just like it always did. Ethan crouched beside it, peering at the mechanism, his brow furrowed in concentration. She should probably go help, or at least tell him where her father kept the tools. Clara grabbed her shawl and headed outside. The October air had warmed slightly, but clouds were building in the west, the kind that meant weather coming. She crossed the yard, her boots crunching on frost-brittle grass. There's a toolbox in the barn, she said by way of greeting. Left side, on the workbench. Ethan looked up, shading his eyes against the flat noon light. I found it. Got what I need. He gestured at an array of wrenches and oil cans laid out on a cloth beside the well. Problem's not the mechanism. It's mineral buildup on the piston. I can clean it, but it'll take time. How much time? Couple hours. We'll have water by evening. Clara nodded, then found herself staying instead of going back inside. You seem to know what you're doing. I've fixed a lot of pumps. Ethan returned his attention to the mechanism, his hands steady as he loosened bolts. You pick up skills when you move around enough. Where are you from? Originally? His hands paused briefly, then continued working. Missouri. Left when I was 15. That's young. Old enough. The words carried a finality that said the subject was closed. Clara tried a different angle. How did you meet James? This question got a response. Ethan sat back on his heels, wiping his hands on a rag. His expression went distant, remembering. Kansas. 5 years ago. I was in trouble, the kind that usually ends with a rope or a bullet. James was the town doctor. He hid me in his barn, patched me up, convinced the sheriff I'd moved on. Ethan's mouth twisted. I had moved on, technically. Just in a coffin he claimed to be shipping to Kansas City. I rode in that box for 6 hours. Despite herself, Clara felt a flicker of curiosity. Why would he risk that for a stranger? I asked him the same thing after. He said everybody deserves a second chance, even people who don't think they deserve one. Ethan met her eyes. He was right about that. Took me a while to believe it, but he was right. What happened then? I tried to go straight. Worked ranches, freight companies, anywhere that'd hire a man who could handle a gun, but was trying not to use it. He turned back to the pump, resuming work. Didn't always succeed. World has a way of pulling you back to what you're good at. Clara heard the weight in those words. What are you good at, Ethan? Surviving. He said it without pride or shame, just stating fact, and making sure other people don't. A chill ran down Clara's spine that had nothing to do with the weather. Is that why James sent you? Because you're good at violence? James sent me because he knew I'd keep my word. The rest, Ethan gestured vaguely with his wrench. That's just insurance. Against what? He looked at her for a long moment, something calculating in his expression. You've been alone here for 2 years, Clara. Working a farm, a woman alone. Nobody's given you trouble? Clara's stomach tightened. Some. Nothing I couldn't handle. What kind of trouble? She didn't want to talk about this. Didn't want to remember the men who'd come sniffing around after her father died, offering help that came with expectations. The drunk ranch hand who'd cornered her in town last spring. The land speculator who'd suggested she might be more comfortable in a city with proper protection. The normal kind, she said finally, men who think a woman alone is an invitation. Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That happened recently? Not since spring. Word got around I wasn't interested. Word won't be enough if someone decides to push harder. He set down the wrench and stood, facing her directly. That's why James sent me, Clara. Not just to work the farm. To make sure nobody takes it from you by force or coercion. A woman with a husband, especially one known to be handy with a gun, that's different from a woman alone. The truth of it settled over Clara like a weight. She'd known, on some level, that her vulnerability was part of the calculation, but hearing it stated so plainly made it real in a way she'd been avoiding. So, you're what? My guard dog? If that's what it takes. No offense in his voice, no defensiveness, just acceptance. Clara studied him in the pale light, this hard man with his careful words and his violent skills, standing in her yard like a promise and a threat in equal measure. And what happens when you leave? When spring comes and you go, what then? Then you'll have 8 months of visible marriage behind you. Legal claim, clear title. You'll have improvements to the land, money in the bank. You'll have options. Or I'll have enemies, men who waited for you to leave so they could come back. Ethan's expression went very still. Is there someone specific I should know about? Clara hesitated, then nodded slowly. Thomas Garrett. He owns the ranch 3 miles west. He's been trying to buy this land for years. Offered my father twice, offered me 3 times since he died. Last time. She stopped, her mouth dry. Last time what? Last time he suggested there were ways to make me more agreeable to selling. Said winter was dangerous for women alone. Said accidents happen. The temperature in the yard seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ethan's face went utterly blank, not calm, but empty, in a way that was somehow more frightening than anger. When was this? His voice was soft. 6 weeks ago. At the general store. In front of witnesses. And you reported it to the sheriff? Clara laughed bitterly. Sheriff Morrison? Thomas Garrett's brother-in-law? No, Ethan, I didn't report it. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he crouched back down beside the pump, his movements deliberate, controlled. This Thomas Garrett, he know you got married yesterday? The whole town knows by now. Mrs. Henderson saw us at the Reverend's. She's the worst gossip in 3 counties. Good. Ethan resumed working on the pump mechanism. Let him hear about it. Let him wonder who the man with the gun is and how comfortable he is using it. And if he decides to find out, then he finds out. Ethan's voice was flat as river stone. But he won't like the answer. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter, suddenly cold despite the noon sun. I don't want violence on this land, Ethan. I don't want blood. Neither do I. He looked up at her, and for the first time she saw something almost gentle in his winter eyes. But I want you safe more than I want clean hands. And if keeping you safe means Garrett and his men learn to stay away, then that's what happens. You'd kill for this? For me? We've known each other a day. I'd kill to keep a promise to a friend. Ethan held her gaze. James asked me to protect you. I said I would. That's not complicated. But it was complicated. It was impossibly complicated. Clara stood in her yard looking at a man who spoke about violence with the same casual tone he'd used discussing lumber and nails, and tried to square that with the careful way he'd placed coffee on her stove, the precise way he'd fit boards on her roof. I need to think, she said abruptly. Take your time. Ethan returned to his work. Pump will be fixed before dark. Clara walked back to the house on unsteady legs. Inside, she paced the kitchen floor, her mind racing. She'd married a dangerous man to save her land. She'd known that yesterday. But knowing it theoretically and confronting it practically were different things entirely. The truth was, she'd been afraid for months. Afraid of Garrett, afraid of the bank, afraid of winter coming with no resources to meet it. She'd lain awake countless nights listening to every creak and groan of the house, jumping at shadows, her father's rifle propped by her bed. And now she had a man with a gun sleeping in her barn, promising protection she hadn't asked for, but desperately needed. Clara stopped pacing and looked out the window. Ethan had returned to work on the pump, his movements methodical, patient. As she watched, he got the mechanism free and began cleaning it with oil and cloth, working out months or maybe years of buildup her father hadn't gotten to, that she hadn't had the strength or knowledge to fix. He was helping. Actually helping, not just with threats and guns, but with labor and skill. The roof was half repaired. The pump would work. The firewood was split. These were tangible things, valuable things. And maybe, the gun at his hip was just another tool. Like the axe, like the wrench. Something he knew how to use and would use if necessary, but not something he wanted to use. Clara pulled her mother's old recipe box from the shelf and began planning dinner. Whatever else Ethan Hale was, he was working hard. He deserved a decent meal. The afternoon stretched long and cold. Clara kneaded bread dough, put a chicken on a roast, peeled potatoes. Domestic work that felt both familiar and strange, knowing she was cooking for 2 instead of 1. Through the window, she watched Ethan finish with the pump, test it until water ran clear and strong, then return to the barn roof. He worked until the light began to fail, then climbed down and spent the last hour of daylight reinforcing the chicken coop with scrap lumber. The hens clucked and fussed, but by the time he finished, their enclosure was twice as sturdy. Clara had dinner ready when he knocked on the door near dusk. She'd set 2 places at the table again, and this time it felt slightly less awkward. "Smells good," Ethan said, hanging his coat on the peg by the door. "It's just roast chicken, nothing fancy. It's a sight better than anything I'd have made." He washed his hands at the sink, scrubbing the day's grime away with thorough attention. "Pump works perfect now. Should last you another 10 years if you keep it oiled." "Thank you." Clara brought the platter to the table. "The roof? Patched and tarred. Won't leak unless we get snow heavier than this barn can handle. And if that happens, leaking's the least of our problems." They sat and served themselves in comfortable silence. Ethan ate with the same focused efficiency as breakfast, but this time Clara noticed he was careful to leave her the choicest pieces, to not take more than his fair share of bread. "You don't have to do that," she said. He looked up, confused. "Do what?" "Hold back, take less. There's enough." Ethan set down his fork, his expression unreadable. "Habit. I've shared meals where there wasn't enough. Hard to break the pattern." Clara felt something in her chest twist. There's enough here, I promise. He nodded once and resumed eating, this time taking a proper portion. They finished the meal in silence that was almost companionable. When Ethan rose to leave, Clara found herself speaking before she'd planned what to say. I've been thinking about what you said, about Thomas Garrett. Ethan paused, his coat halfway on. I'm grateful, Clara continued carefully, for the protection, for the deterrent. But I meant what I said about not wanting violence. If there's trouble, I want to try other ways first. Like what? Like the law, like community, like making sure people know what's happening so Garrett can't hide behind respectability. Clara met his eyes. He's a bully, Ethan. Bullies thrive in shadow, so we put him in light. Ethan considered this, then nodded slowly. That's smart. Harder to threaten a woman whose husband is known and visible. Harder still if the whole town's watching. Exactly. But if it comes to it, if he doesn't take the hint and he pushes anyway, then we deal with that when it happens. Clara's voice was firm. Together. Not you alone, not me alone. Together. Something shifted in Ethan's expression. Surprise, maybe. Or something adjacent to respect. Together, he agreed. He left then, disappearing into the gathering dark. Clara watched from the window as the barn lamp flickered to life. She could see his shadow moving inside, settling in for the night. She cleaned the dishes, banked the fire, locked the doors. Upstairs, she changed into her nightgown and sat on the edge of the bed, turning the ring on her finger. One day, married. One day of this strange new life. It hadn't been terrible. It hadn't been what she'd wanted, but it hadn't been terrible. Clara lay down and pulled the quilt up to her chin. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window glass. Storm coming, just like Ethan had predicted. But the roof was patched now. The firewood was split. The pump worked. Small things, tangible things, maybe enough to build on. She closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under, and this time sleep came easier than the night before. The storm broke near midnight with a fury that rattled the farmhouse to its bones. Clara woke to thunder that sounded like the sky splitting open, rain hammering the roof in sheets. She lay in the darkness, listening to the wind scream around the eaves, testing every board and shingle. But the roof held. No drips, no leaks, no water finding its way through cracks that had plagued her through last winter's storms. Ethan's work, already proving its worth. She must have dozed again because the next thing she knew, dawn was bleeding gray through the curtains and the storm had gentled to steady rain. Clara dressed and went downstairs to find the kitchen cold. She'd let the fire die overnight, but dry. No puddles on the floor, no damp patches on the ceiling. The house had weathered the night intact. Through the window, she could see the barn standing solid against the rain, smoke rising from the small stove Ethan must have lit inside. The man was already awake, already working. Clara shook her head and set about building her own fire, filling the coffee pot, starting breakfast. She was sliding biscuits into the oven when she heard boots on the porch. A knock followed, brief, courteous. "It's open," she called. Ethan entered with rain dripping from his hat brim, his coat dark with water. "Morning. Came to check the house made it through all right." Roof held perfectly, not a drop inside. Clara poured coffee and handed him a cup. "Thank you for that." He accepted the coffee with a nod, wrapping his hands around the warmth. "Checked the fence line at first light. North section's worse than I thought. 3 posts down completely, wire tangled in the brush. I'll need to rebuild it proper, not just patch. That'll take days. Week probably, but it needs doing. Stock could wander, and come winter you'll want boundaries clear for snow management." Ethan sipped his coffee, his expression thoughtful. "I'll need supplies, fence posts, wire, staples. You want to come to town with me to approve the purchases?" Clara considered. Going to town together would make their marriage visible in a way yesterday's rushed ceremony hadn't. People would see them, talk, draw conclusions. It would establish Ethan's presence as permanent rather than temporary. It would also give Thomas Garrett a chance to see exactly who he'd be dealing with now. "Yes," she said. "I'll come. After breakfast." They ate quickly, efficiently, then Clara changed into her better dress. Not the blue one, but a serviceable gray wool that wouldn't show road dust. She pinned her hair up properly, tucked a few bills from her emergency fund into her handbag, and met Ethan by the wagon. The rain had slowed to a misty drizzle that hung in the air like cobwebs. The road to town was mud-slick and rutted, requiring careful navigation. Ethan drove with the same quiet competence he brought to everything else, guiding the horse around the worst spots. "Tell me about the town," he said after several minutes of silence. "Who matters? Who doesn't? Who I need to watch?" Clara appreciated the directness. "Sheriff Morrison matters because he's the law, even if he's Garrett's brother-in-law. Don't antagonize him if you can help it. Reverend Michaels has influence. People listen to him. Mrs. Henderson gossips, but she's kind underneath, and she can sway opinion if she likes you. And Garrett? He owns the biggest ranch in the county, employs maybe 30 men, rich enough to buy favors, powerful enough that people don't cross him lightly." Clara's hands tightened in her lap. "He's careful to keep things legal on the surface, respectable. But everyone knows the reality underneath." "How long has he wanted your land?" "Since before my father died. The farm controls water access to a whole section of his range. Without it, his stock has to go miles for water in dry seasons." Clara stared out at the rain-soaked landscape. "My grandfather refused to sell. My father refused, and I've refused. But I'm the weak link, a woman alone. Or I was." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "You're not weak, Clara. Stubborn, maybe, determined, but not weak." The words, spoken matter-of-factly without flattery or exaggeration, warmed something in Clara's chest. Determination doesn't stop armed men. "No, but it counts for something." He glanced at her briefly. "James wrote about you in his letters to me, said you had steel in your spine, said you'd held that farm together through grief and debt when most people would have folded. He admired that." Clara's throat tightened. "He wrote to you about me?" "Some. Mostly about himself, his plans, what he hoped to build with you. But he mentioned your strength more than once. It's part of why he wanted to make sure you were protected." Ethan returned his attention to the road. He knew what you were worth, knew you deserved better than what circumstance had dealt you. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it felt different now. Less like two strangers forced together, more like two people beginning to understand the shape of their arrangement. Benton Falls appeared through the mist like a sketch in gray and brown. Weathered buildings lining the muddy street. A few early risers moving between shops despite the rain. Ethan drove straight to Fletcher's general store and hardware, parking the wagon under the broad awning that kept merchandise dry. Inside, the store smelled of coffee and sawdust and lamp oil. Mr. Fletcher looked up from his ledger as they entered, his eyebrows rising with interest. "Mrs. Whitmore, or should I say Mrs. Hale now?" He came around the counter, his expression curious and calculating in equal measure. "Heard you got yourself married yesterday. Quick work, that." "Mr. Fletcher, this is my husband, Ethan Hale." Clara kept her voice steady and polite. "We need fencing supplies, posts, wire, staples." "Husband, eh?" Fletcher's gaze traveled over Ethan, lingering on the gun at his hip. "Can't say I've seen you around before, Mr. Hale. Where you from?" "Around." Ethan's tone was pleasant but final. "The fencing supplies?" Fletcher's smile tightened slightly. Of course. How much you need?" They spent 20 minutes going over quantities and prices. Clara was acutely aware of other customers drifting in, ears tuned to the conversation. Mrs. Henderson arrived with her shopping basket and immediately positioned herself within listening range. Two ranch hands from one of the neighboring spreads lounged near the pickle barrel, pretending to examine merchandise while watching Ethan with wary eyes. When the bill came due, Ethan paid without hesitation, counting out bills from a wallet that looked well-stocked. Fletcher's eyes widened slightly at the sight of cash money. "I'll have everything loaded within the hour," he said, making notes in his ledger. "You want it delivered?" "We'll wait and take it ourselves." Ethan gathered the receipt. "Appreciate your help." They stepped back out under the awning just as a group of riders came down the main street. Clara's stomach dropped. She recognized the lead horse, a big bay gelding, and the man riding it. Thomas Garrett. He was a large man, barrel-chested and heavy-shouldered, with iron gray hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone and left unfinished. He rode with the confidence of someone who owned half the territory and planned to own the other half soon. 3 men rode behind him, ranch hands, hired muscle, the kind who did whatever Garrett paid them to do. Garrett reined up when he saw Clara standing under the awning. His eyes moved from her to Ethan and back again, calculating, assessing. "Clara?" He touched his hat brim in a gesture that mocked courtesy. "Heard interesting news yesterday. Heard you went and got yourself hitched." "Mr. Garrett." Clara kept her voice level, though her heart was hammering. "This is my husband, Ethan Hale. Ethan, Thomas Garrett." Garrett's gaze fixed on Ethan with the intensity of a man measuring an opponent. "Hale." "Can't say the name's familiar. You from around here?" "No." Ethan's stance was relaxed, but Clara could see the subtle shift in his weight, the way his right hand stayed loose near his gun. "Just passing through. Decided to stay." "Passing through?" Garrett's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Funny how that works. Man just happens to show up and marry a woman with land trouble right before her foreclosure comes due. Some might call that convenient. Some might call it fortunate." Ethan's tone was mild, almost pleasant. "Fortunate for me, getting a good woman and good land. Fortunate for Clara, getting help when she needed it. Don't see the problem." "Problem is, I don't know you. Don't know what you are, where you came from, what you're running from." Garrett leaned forward in his saddle. "This is a small community, Hale. We look after our own, and we're careful about outsiders who come in trying to take what doesn't belong to them. I'm not taking anything. I married Clara legal and proper, paid her debts, working her farm, all above board." Ethan's eyes were cold as river ice. "But I appreciate your concern for the community. Shows real civic spirit." The sarcasm was subtle but unmistakable. Garrett's face darkened. "You got a smart mouth for a drifter. And you've got a lot of opinions about other people's marriages for a man who's not invited to the wedding." Ethan's voice stayed level, but something dangerous crept into it. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we've got supplies to collect and a farm to run. Unless there's actual business you need to discuss." For a long moment, Garrett didn't move. The street had gone quiet. Other people on errands had stopped to watch, sensing the tension. Clara could feel her pulse in her throat, could see Garrett's men shifting in their saddles, hands drifting toward guns. Then Garrett laughed, a harsh bark of sound. "No business, just being neighborly. Welcome to the territory, Hale. Hope it treats you well." He wheeled his horse and rode off, his men following. But the threat hung in the air like smoke. Clara released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Beside her, Ethan remained still, watching until Garrett and his men disappeared around a corner. "That's him?" Ethan asked quietly. "That's him. He's used to intimidation working. Usually does." Ethan glanced at her, and something that might have been a smile touched his mouth. "You handled that well. Didn't flinch, didn't back down. I was terrified. I know. But you didn't show it. That matters." Mrs. Henderson bustled over, her face flushed with excitement and concern. "Clara, dear, are you all right? That was so tense. I thought Thomas was going to... Well, I don't know what I thought he was going to do, but your husband certainly didn't seem worried." "I'm fine, Mrs. Henderson. Thank you." Clara managed a smile. "Just a neighborly conversation." That was about as neighborly as a rattlesnake in a henhouse." Mrs. Henderson looked at Ethan with open approval. "But I must say, Mr. Hale, you handled yourself admirably. Thomas Garrett isn't used to people standing up to him." "Is that so?" Ethan's tone was politely interested. "Oh, yes. He's used to getting his way through bluster and bullying, but you didn't give an inch." She beamed at Clara. "I'd say you married well, dear. Very well indeed." Other townspeople were drifting closer now, emboldened by Mrs. Henderson's endorsement. Mr. Cooper from the bank nodded approvingly. Reverend Michaels, emerging from the post office, came over to shake Ethan's hand and offer congratulations. Even Sheriff Morrison, who'd been watching from across the street, approached with cautious civility. "Mr. Hale." Morrison was a thin man with a pinched face and suspicious eyes. "I'm the sheriff here. Like to know who's new in town, especially men who carry guns like they know how to use them." "Sheriff." Ethan shook his hand with the same careful courtesy he'd shown everyone else. "I'm no trouble. Just here to work my wife's farm and live quiet. See that you do. Morrison's gaze was hard. We run a peaceful town, like to keep it that way. Suits me fine. Ethan's expression gave nothing away. Peace and quiet is exactly what I'm looking for. Morrison studied him a moment longer, then nodded and walked away. But Clara noticed he headed in the same direction Garrett had gone. Brother-in-law, Ethan observed quietly. Yes. So Garrett will know everything we said within the hour. Probably less. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. Good. Let him know I'm not going anywhere. Let him know trying to push you around means going through me. He looked at Clara. Unless you'd rather I'd handled that differently. Clara thought about it, about the careful balance Ethan had struck between firmness and civility, between standing his ground and not escalating to violence. No, you did it right. You made your point without giving him legal cause to act. That was the idea. Mr. Fletcher emerged from the store with 2 ranch hands carrying their supplies. All loaded up, folks. You're good to go. They climbed back into the wagon and started the drive home. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving the world washed clean and smelling of wet earth. Clara felt the tension of the encounter beginning to drain from her shoulders. That went better than I expected, she said after they'd cleared the town limits. Did it? Ethan sounded genuinely curious. How so? I thought there might be violence, thought Garrett might push harder. He was testing, seeing what kind of man he's dealing with, whether I'd fold or fight. Ethan guided the wagon around a deep puddle. He'll push harder later, once he's decided I'm a real obstacle and not just a temporary inconvenience. The certainty in his voice sent ice down Clara's spine. You think he'll come to the farm? Eventually, not alone, not directly. He'll send men first, test our defenses. See if I'm as capable as I look or just putting on a show. When? Hard to say. Could be days, could be weeks. Depends how patient he is and how much he wants your water access. Ethan glanced at her. We should be ready either way. Clara's hands tightened on the edge of the wagon seat. What does being ready look like? Means I fix that fence so we know our boundaries. Means we make sure the rifle is clean and loaded. Means you learn to shoot it properly if you don't already know how. Means we have a plan for if trouble comes at night. He spoke calmly, like he was discussing crop rotation. Means we make it more trouble than it's worth to mess with us. The rest of the drive passed in silence. When they reached the farm, Ethan unloaded the supplies with swift efficiency while Clara started lunch. She found herself watching him through the window, the way he moved with purpose, the way he constantly scanned the horizon even while working. He'd been right yesterday. He was good at surviving, and now he was teaching her to survive too. They ate cold sandwiches. Clara hadn't had time to cook anything substantial. Ethan devoured his in minutes, then stood and collected his hat. I'm going to start on that fence. Should get at least 3 posts set before dark. Ethan. Clara stopped him before he could leave. This morning, in town. Thank you. For handling Garrett the way you did, for not making it worse. He looked at her for a long moment, something complicated moving behind his eyes. I told you I'd protect you, Clara. That doesn't just mean with guns. Sometimes it means knowing when not to use them. After he left, Clara cleaned up and then found herself restless, unable to settle to indoor work. She pulled on her father's old work coat and boots and went outside. The sky was clearing, patches of blue showing between tattered gray clouds. The air smelled fresh, clean. She found Ethan at the north fence line, using a post hole digger with methodical precision. He'd already set 2 new posts, their raw wood bright against the weathered ones still standing. Need help? Clara called. He looked up, surprised. You don't have to. I know, but it's my fence. Seems right that I help build it. Ethan studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, you can tamp the dirt while I set the posts. Makes them sturdier. They worked side by side through the afternoon, falling into a rhythm. Ethan would dig and position a post, Clara would pack the earth tight around it, then they'd move to the next spot. It was hard physical labor that left Clara's arms aching and her hands blistered despite her gloves. But there was something deeply satisfying about it, about building something together, about seeing the fence line take shape. Your father teach you to work like this? Ethan asked during a water break. Both my parents. Mother said a farm woman needed to know every job, not just the kitchen work. Father agreed. Clara flexed her sore fingers. He taught me to mend fence, work stock, handle the wagon, wanted me self-sufficient. Smart man. He was, though I think even he would have drawn the line at me living alone as long as I have. Clara took another drink, then capped the canteen. He worried about me, worried I'd end up isolated, cut off, tried to convince me to move to town after Mother died. Why didn't you? Clara looked out across the land, the rolling pasture, the line of cottonwoods marking the creek, the mountains rising purple in the distance. Because this is home. Because 3 generations of my family are buried on that hill. Because walking away felt like erasing them. I understand that. Ethan's voice was quiet. I don't have anywhere I belong. Haven't for years. But I remember what it felt like when I did. Remember what it cost to lose it. Clara turned to look at him. What happened? To make you leave Missouri? His expression closed down immediately, walls slamming into place. Nothing worth telling. Ethan? Clara. He met her eyes, and she saw something almost like pain there. There are things in my past that don't bear examining, things I'm not proud of, things I can't take back. James knew some of it. He helped me anyway. But I'd rather you didn't know. I'd rather you could look at me without seeing blood. The rawness in his voice stopped her questions cold. Clara nodded slowly. All right, I won't push. Thank you. They returned to work, but the ease between them had fractured slightly. Clara could feel Ethan's withdrawal, the way he'd retreated behind his careful walls. It reminded her that despite 2 days of proximity, despite a shared name and legal bond, he was still fundamentally a stranger. A stranger with a violent past and secrets he wouldn't share. They worked until dusk forced them to stop, managing 6 posts in total. Ethan pronounced himself satisfied with the progress and promised to string wire tomorrow. They walked back to the farmhouse together, both tired, both muddy. I'll wash up at the pump, Ethan said. Don't want to track dirt through your kitchen. Clara nodded and went inside alone. She built up the fire, set water to heat for washing, and started dinner, venison stew from a deer one of the neighbors had shared last week. Her hands moved automatically through familiar tasks while her mind churned. She was married to a man she didn't really know. A man who'd faced down Thomas Garrett without flinching, who worked her land with skill and dedication, who spoke about violence as casually as weather, a man who'd promised to protect her but wouldn't tell her who he was protecting her from becoming. The ring on her finger felt heavy. Dinner was quiet. They ate and made small talk about the fence, the weather, the supplies needed for tomorrow. All surface, nothing deep. When Ethan left for the barn, Clara felt an unexpected pang of loneliness. She'd been alone for 2 years. She should be used to it by now. But somehow having another person close enough to hear, close enough to call to, and still feeling alone was worse than actual solitude. Clara cleaned up and went to bed early, exhausted from the day's labor. She fell asleep quickly but woke near midnight to the sound of something outside. Not the usual farm noises, not owls or coyotes or wind in the trees. Horses. She was out of bed and at the window in seconds, her heart pounding. Through the darkness, she could see shapes moving near the barn. 4, maybe 5 riders, walking their horses slow and quiet. One carried a torch. Terror flooded through her. This was it. Garrett's men. Come to test them. Clara grabbed her father's rifle from beside the bed and ran downstairs barefoot, her nightgown tangling around her legs. She reached the front door just as she heard Ethan's voice cut through the night, loud and clear. That's far enough, gentlemen. State your business or turn around. Clara cracked the door open, staying in shadow. She could see Ethan now, standing in the barn doorway with his rifle raised and aimed. The visitors had stopped about 30 yards out, torchlight painting their faces in harsh relief. She didn't recognize any of them. Easy, friend, the man with the torch spoke with affected calm. We're just riding through. Saw your light. Thought we'd see if you had water to spare. Creek's a quarter-mile east. Help yourself. Ethan's voice was flat, brooking no argument. This is private property. Mighty unfriendly for a newcomer. Mighty late for honest men to be riding. Ethan took a step forward, his rifle never wavering. I'll say it once more. You're not welcome here. Leave. The riders exchanged glances. Clara held her breath, her finger on the rifle's trigger, ready to back Ethan's play if shooting started. Then the lead rider shrugged. No offense meant, friend. We'll move along. They turned their horses and rode off into the darkness, unhurried, unconcerned. Clara watched until they disappeared, then lowered her rifle with shaking hands. Ethan stayed in position for several more minutes before finally lowering his weapon. He scanned the darkness, listening, then walked to the house. Clara met him at the door. "You all right?" he asked. "Yes. You?" "Fine. They were just testing, like I said they would, seeing if I'd spook, if I'd shoot, if I'd let them get close." Ethan's face was grim in the faint lamplight. "They'll report back to Garrett that I don't spook, and I don't let anyone close. That might buy us time. Or it might make him send more men next time." Clara's voice shook slightly. "Maybe." Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and his expression softened. "You came down ready to fight, with the rifle." "Of course I did. This is my land, my fight." "Our fight," he corrected gently. "That's what you said. Together." Clara nodded, too shaken to speak. "Go back to bed," Ethan said. "I'll keep watch the rest of the night. If they come back, I'll wake you. But I don't think they will, not tonight." "Ethan, I've got this, Clara. Trust me." She wanted to argue, wanted to insist on sharing the watch, but exhaustion and fear had left her wrung out. She climbed the stairs on trembling legs and crawled back into bed, still clutching the rifle. Through her window, she could see the barn lamp burning bright, could see Ethan's shadow moving inside. Standing guard, keeping watch, keeping his promise. Clara closed her eyes and tried to slow her racing heart. This was her life now. Midnight visitors and armed standoffs, and a husband who faced danger like it was just another chore to be handled. She'd known marrying Ethan would change things. She just hadn't realized how completely. Sleep didn't come back easily. Clara lay in the darkness listening to every sound, her rifle within arm's reach, until gray dawn finally crept through the curtains. When she rose, stiff and unrested, she found Ethan in the kitchen already brewing coffee. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his jaw was rough with stubble, but his hands were steady as he poured. "You didn't sleep at all," Clara said. "Didn't need to." He handed her a cup. "They didn't come back, like I thought." Clara wrapped her hands around the warmth and studied his face. "You can't stay awake every night, Ethan. You'll wear yourself down to nothing." "Won't need to. They got their answer last night. This farm isn't easy pickings. Garrett will have to decide if pushing harder is worth the cost." Ethan leaned against the counter, fatigue evident in the line of his shoulders despite his words. "Give it a few days. He'll either back off or escalate. Either way, we'll know where we stand. And in the meantime? In the meantime, we work. We build. We show this place is occupied and defended." He drained his coffee in 2 long swallows. "I'm going to finish that fence today. All of it. Want it done before anything else happens." Clara started to protest that he needed rest, then stopped herself. She'd seen enough of Ethan to know he wouldn't listen. The man drove himself like a machine, as if stopping meant giving ground he couldn't afford to lose. Instead, she said, "Then I'll bring you lunch in the field. Save you the walk back." Something that might have been gratitude flickered in his eyes. "Appreciate that." He left as soon as the sun cleared the horizon, and Clara watched him stride toward the fence line with his tools. Then she forced herself into her own routine, feeding chickens, collecting eggs, starting bread dough. Normal tasks that felt absurd after a night of armed standoff. Around mid-morning, a wagon rattled up the drive. Clara's heart leapt to her throat until she recognized Mrs. Henderson on the seat, a covered basket beside her. "Clara, dear." The older woman climbed down with surprising agility. "I hope I'm not intruding, but I simply had to come check on you after yesterday. The whole town's buzzing about your husband facing down Thomas Garrett." Clara managed a smile and invited her in. Mrs. Henderson bustled into the kitchen, setting her basket on the table and immediately pouring herself tea like she owned the place. "Now then," she settled into a chair with a satisfied sigh. "Tell me everything. How are you managing with your new husband? Is he treating you well? Some of the ladies were concerned, given how quickly it all happened." "He's treating me fine, Mrs. Henderson. He's been nothing but respectful." Clara busied herself slicing bread, uncomfortable with the scrutiny. Respectful is one thing, dear, but marriage requires more than that. Is there, she lowered her voice conspiratorially, affection between you? Romance? Clara felt her cheeks heat. It's a partnership, Mrs. Henderson. A practical arrangement. We both understood that going in. Oh, Clara. The older woman's face softened with sympathy. That's no kind of marriage for a young woman. You deserve love, dear. Passion, not just a business arrangement. I deserve to keep my land, Clara said quietly. Everything else is secondary. Mrs. Henderson studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Well, at least he's working hard. I could see that fence work from the road. He's making real progress. And the way he stood up to Thomas yesterday, not backing down an inch, that took courage. Or foolishness. Sometimes they're the same thing. Mrs. Henderson pulled a pie from her basket. Apple from my own trees. Consider it a wedding gift, late as it is. And Clara, she covered Clara's hand with her own. If you ever need anything, if that man ever makes you afraid or uncomfortable, you come straight to me. Marriage license or no, you don't have to endure mistreatment. The kindness in her voice made Clara's throat tight. Thank you. But honestly, Ethan's been nothing but honorable. He sleeps in the barn, keeps his distance, works hard. I have no complaints. Sleeping in the barn? Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows rose. Well, that is respectable. Unusual, but respectable. She patted Clara's hand once more and stood. I should let you get back to your day, but remember what I said. My door's always open. After she left, Clara stood at the window with the pie in her hands, watching her wagon disappear down the road. The visit had been kindness, genuine concern from a woman who'd known her all her life. But it had also been reconnaissance, Mrs. Henderson gathering information to feed the town gossip mill. By tomorrow, everyone in Benton Falls would know that Ethan Hale slept in the barn and treated his wife with distant respect. Some would approve. Others would whisper that something wasn't quite right about a marriage without warmth. Clara didn't know which bothered her more, the scrutiny or the fact that she couldn't entirely disagree with their concerns. She packed lunch in a basket and walked out to the fence line near noon. Ethan had made remarkable progress. The entire north section was repaired. New posts standing straight and strong, wire strung tight and true. He was working the west section now, his movements economical despite obvious exhaustion. Lunch, Clara called. He straightened slowly, pressing a hand to his lower back. Thanks. I could use a break. They sat in the grass beside the fence, and Clara unpacked cold chicken, fresh bread, and 2 slices of Mrs. Henderson's apple pie. Ethan ate with focused intensity, barely pausing between bites. Mrs. Henderson came by this morning, Clara said. Brought the pie. And questions. Ethan's mouth quirked slightly. Imagine she had plenty of those. She wanted to know if you were treating me well. If there was... Clara hesitated, then pushed forward. Affection between us. What did you tell her? The truth. That this is a partnership, a practical arrangement. That you've been nothing but respectful. Ethan nodded, chewing thoughtfully. And what did she say to that? That I deserve better. That a young woman should have love and romance, not just a business transaction. Clara picked at her own food. She's not wrong. No, Ethan agreed quietly. She's not. The admission hung between them, honest and uncomfortable. Clara found herself studying his profile. The sharp line of his jaw, the scar through his eyebrow, the way exhaustion had carved deeper hollows beneath his cheekbones. Why did you agree to this, Ethan? The question emerged before she could stop it. Really, not just because James asked. You could have refused, could have given me the money, and walked away. Why take on a stranger's problems? Why tie yourself to a farm and a woman you don't know? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he set down his food and looked at her directly. Because I'm tired, he said simply. Tired of running, tired of violence, tired of being the man I've been. James offered me a chance at something different, a reason to stay in one place, to build instead of destroy, to be someone better than who I was. His eyes held hers. Maybe it was selfish. Maybe I'm using you as much as you're using me. But when he asked me to come here, to honor his promise to you, it felt like a chance at redemption I didn't deserve, but wanted anyway. The rawness of it stunned Clara into silence. She'd expected platitudes, maybe, or deflection, not this stark honesty. "What are you running from?" she asked softly. Ethan's expression closed down. "Nothing I can outrun, just things I'm trying to leave behind." He stood, brushing crumbs from his pants. "I should get back to work. Want this fence finished before dark." Clara watched him return to his labor, his words echoing in her mind. A man tired of running, looking for redemption in fence posts and honest work. She wondered what he'd done that required such desperate seeking of absolution. She wondered if she'd ever be brave enough to ask directly. The afternoon wore on. Clara returned to the house and threw herself into work, scrubbing floors, washing windows, attacking grime and dust with single-minded determination. Physical labor that kept her hands busy and her mind from circling endlessly around questions she couldn't answer. She was beating rugs on the porch when she heard horses again. Her heart stuttered, but these riders came from the east, not the direction of town. Two men on sturdy ranch horses, both wearing friendly smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Ethan appeared from around the barn before Clara could react, his rifle carried casually but ready. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The lead rider touched his hat brim. "Afternoon. We're from the Garrett Ranch, sent to check boundaries. Had some cattle drift this way, wanted to make sure we got them all rounded up." "Haven't seen any cattle on this property." Ethan's tone was polite but firm. "And the boundaries are clearly marked. Your boss knows exactly where his land ends and ours begins." Sure. Just doing our job, you understand." The man's smile never wavered. "Say, you're the new husband, aren't you? Ethan Hale?" "That's right. Garrett mentioned you, said you seemed like a capable man." The rider shifted in his saddle, his hand resting casually near his gun. "He also mentioned he'd be interested in talking business with you sometime, man to man. Might be worth your while." "I'm not interested in business with your boss," Ethan said flatly. "This farm's not for sale and that's final. You can tell him I said so." The second rider spoke up, his voice harder than his companion's. "Garrett's a generous man when people cooperate. Stubborn people sometimes find life gets difficult." The threat was barely veiled. Clara's hand tightened on the porch railing. Ethan's expression didn't change, but something cold slipped into his voice. "Is that right? Well, you can tell Garrett that I've lived through difficult before. Survived things that would have broken softer men. So if he's planning to make life hard, he'd better be prepared for me to make it hard right back." The two men exchanged glances. The lead rider's smile finally slipped. "Just delivering a message, friend. No need to get hostile." "I'm not hostile. I'm clear. Clear that this property is protected. Clear that we don't want visitors. Clear that the next person who comes onto this land uninvited is going to have a problem." Ethan took a step forward. "Now, unless you actually found stray cattle, which we both know you didn't, I suggest you ride back to your boss and tell him to stop testing me. I don't test well." For a moment, Clara thought it would tip into violence. Both ranch hands had their hands near their guns, and Ethan's rifle was still ready. The air felt charged, dangerous. Then the lead rider shrugged. "Your funeral, Hale. Come on, Pete." They turned their horses and rode off at a leisurely pace, making it clear they weren't intimidated. But they were leaving, which was what mattered. Ethan watched until they were out of sight, then turned to Clara. "They'll be back, or others like them. Garrett's applying pressure, seeing where we crack." "We're not going to crack." Clara descended the porch steps, her chin lifted. "Are we?" "No, ma'am, we're not." Ethan's expression was grim. "But we need to be smart about this. Prepared." "What does that mean?" "Means tonight I teach you to shoot that rifle properly. Means we make sure every entrance to this house can be barred from inside. Means we have a plan for if they come at night with fire or guns." He met her eyes. "Means we stop pretending this is going to resolve peacefully and start preparing for war." The word hung between them, stark and terrible. "I don't want war," Clara whispered. "Neither do I. But sometimes you don't get a choice." Ethan's voice gentled slightly. "I'll do everything I can to avoid bloodshed, Clara, but I won't let them take this land, and I won't let them hurt you, whatever that requires." Clara nodded, her throat too tight for words. She'd known this was coming, had felt it building since the moment Thomas Garrett rode up yesterday morning, but having it stated so plainly made it real in a way nothing else had. That evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of amber and violet, Ethan set up targets against the hillside and taught Clara to shoot. She'd fired her father's rifle before, but Ethan corrected her stance, her grip, her breathing. He was patient and thorough. And by the time darkness fell, Clara could hit a target at 50 yards more often than not. "Good," Ethan said as they walked back to the house. "You've got steady hands. That counts for a lot. Have you had to do this before? Teach someone to shoot?" "Once or twice." He didn't elaborate, and Clara didn't push. Inside, they ate a quiet dinner. Clara served the apple pie for dessert, and Ethan praised it with the enthusiasm of a man who rarely tasted anything homemade. The small moment of normalcy felt precious after the day's tensions. When Ethan rose to leave for the barn, Clara found herself reluctant to let him go. The house felt too empty, too vulnerable without another person inside its walls. "Ethan," she stopped him at the door. "Thank you. For today. For standing up to those men. It's what I'm here for. Still. Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "And thank you for being honest with me about why you came, what you're looking for. It helps, knowing your reasons." His expression softened. "You deserved honesty. You've had enough lies in your life between the bank and Garrett and whatever else. Figured the least I could do was tell you the truth." After he left, Clara barred the door and checked every window. She climbed to her room and positioned the rifle beside her bed, within easy reach. Then she lay in the darkness, listening. The night passed without incident. No riders, no torches, no threats emerging from the darkness, just the usual farm sounds, wind, distant coyotes, the creak of the house settling. But Clara barely slept. Every sound made her tense, waiting for violence that didn't come. Dawn arrived cold and clear, the sky scrubbed clean by night wind. Clara rose exhausted and went downstairs to find Ethan already in the kitchen again, coffee made, looking just as tired as she felt. "We can't keep this up," she said without preamble. "Neither of us sleeping, both of us running on nerves. We'll burn out before Garrett even makes his real move." "I know." Ethan poured coffee with hands that trembled slightly. "But I don't know how to stop. Can't let my guard down, not with them circling." Clara made a decision. "Then we take watches. You sleep first half of the night in the barn. I keep watch from the house. Second half we switch. I sleep. You watch. That way we both get rest and nothing's left unguarded." Ethan looked at her with surprise. "You'd trust me in the house while you sleep? You've kept your word about everything else. Why wouldn't I trust you about this?" Clara met his gaze steadily. "We're in this together, Ethan. That means actually working together, not just paralleling each other. If we're going to survive what's coming, I need you rested and sharp, and you need the same from me." He studied her for a long moment, something complicated moving behind his eyes. Finally, he nodded. "All right, we'll try it your way. But if anything happens, I wake you immediately. I know." Clara managed a tired smile. "I'm stubborn, not stupid. Never thought you were stupid." The corner of his mouth lifted. "Stubborn, though, yeah. But that's not a bad thing." They spent the day working separately, Ethan finishing the fence while Clara tackled preserving the last of the garden vegetables. Normal, ordinary work that felt surreal after days of tension and threat. Around mid-afternoon, Clara looked up from her canning to see Sheriff Morrison riding up the drive. Her stomach sank. Ethan emerged from the barn as Morrison dismounted. The sheriff's face was carefully neutral, professional. "Mr. Hale, Mrs. Hale." He nodded to each of them. "Mind if I ask you a few questions?" "Depends on the questions," Ethan said evenly. "I've had reports of armed confrontations on this property. Visitors being threatened. Thought I should investigate." Morrison's gaze was sharp. "You having trouble with folks, Hale?" "No trouble, Sheriff. Just making clear that uninvited visitors aren't welcome. This is private property." Ethan's tone was respectful but firm. "Is there a law against defending your own land?" "There's laws against threatening people." "Didn't threaten anyone, just stated facts. There's a difference." Ethan crossed his arms. "These reports, they come from Thomas Garrett's men, by chance?" Morrison's expression tightened. "Where they came from isn't relevant. What's relevant is keeping the peace in this county. I don't want trouble between you and Garrett." Neither do I, Sheriff. That's why I've been polite but firm with everyone who's come around. Haven't raised my gun to anyone, haven't fired a shot. Ethan's voice hardened slightly. But I will defend my wife and my property if pushed. That's not a threat. That's a promise. See that you keep things legal, Hale. I won't tolerate vigilante justice in my county. And I won't tolerate harassment of my wife. Funny how your concern about law and order only showed up after Garrett's men started testing our boundaries. Ethan took a step forward. Where was the law when Clara was here alone, facing pressure and threats? Where was your protection then? Morrison's face flushed. I can't be everywhere at once. No, but you can choose who you protect and who you don't. You've made that choice pretty clear. Ethan's tone was flat with contempt. Now, if that's all your questions, Sheriff, I've got work to do. For a moment, Clara thought Morrison would push back, would arrest Ethan for insolence or find some excuse to haul him to town. But instead, the sheriff just turned to his horse, his movements stiff with anger. Watch yourself, Hale. You're making enemies. Already had enemies, just letting them know I'm not easy prey. Morrison rode off without another word. Clara released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. You shouldn't antagonize him, she said quietly. He could make trouble for us. He's already made his choice, Clara. He's Garrett's man, always has been. Being polite won't change that. Ethan's jaw was tight. But you're right that we need to be careful. No mistakes, no legal openings for him to use against us. That night they implemented their watch system. Ethan slept first, curled in the barn loft, while Clara kept vigil from the darkened house. She sat at the kitchen table with the rifle across her knees, watching the yard through the window. Hours crept past in tense silence. Near midnight she woke him, and they switched. Ethan moved into the kitchen, Clara climbed to her room. She expected to lie awake, too wired to rest with him in the house. Instead, she fell asleep almost immediately, as if her body had been waiting for permission to finally let go. She woke to gray dawn and the smell of coffee. Downstairs, Ethan looked more rested than she'd seen him in days. It worked, he said simply. Yeah, it did. They fell into the new rhythm. Days of work, nights of split watches. Slow, gradual progress on the farm as November approached and the air turned colder. The fence was finished, the barn roof was solid, the chicken coop expanded. Small victories that felt enormous in the shadow of waiting for Garrett's next move. But the move didn't come. Days passed, then a week. No midnight riders, no threatening visits, just silence from the direction of Garrett's ranch. Maybe he's backing off, Clara said one evening as they shared dinner. Ethan shook his head. He's not backing off, he's planning, taking time to figure out how to come at us that won't blow back on him legally. He pushed food around his plate. The quiet's almost worse than the threats. Means he's being strategic. How long do we wait? Long as it takes. We keep working, keep building, keep showing we're not going anywhere. Ethan met her eyes. We're in this for the long haul, Clara. Might as well get used to it. The long haul. Clara touched the ring on her finger, thinking about spring, about the promise that Ethan would leave if she wanted. That had been the deal, temporary protection in exchange for honest labor. But looking at him across the table now, seeing the changes in her farm, feeling the difference between being alone and being partnered, she wondered if spring would bring the clarity they'd both assumed, or if it would just bring more complicated questions. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the sharp scent of coming snow. Winter was almost here, and with it, Clara suspected, would come Thomas Garrett's reckoning. She just hoped they'd be ready when it arrived. The attack came on the first night of real snow, 3 weeks after Sheriff Morrison's visit. Clara was on second watch, positioned at the kitchen window with a quilt around her shoulders and the rifle across her lap. The world outside was silent and white, snowflakes falling thick and steady, muffling everything. She almost missed the orange glow on the horizon. Clara blinked, thinking her tired eyes were playing tricks, but the glow brightened, flickering, spreading, fire, in the direction of the southern pasture where they'd stacked hay for winter feeding. Her heart lurched. She grabbed the rifle and ran for the door, throwing it open. Ethan! He was already emerging from the barn, rifle in hand, having seen the same glow. They met in the yard, both breathing hard. The hay! Clara gasped. I see it. Ethan's voice was deadly calm. Stay here. Bar the door. This could be a diversion. I'm coming with you. Clara, it's my hay, my land, my fight. We go together or not at all? Ethan's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Stay close. Stay behind me. And if I say run, you run back to the house. Understood? Understood. They moved through the snow toward the glow. The closer they got, the clearer it became. The entire haystack was burning, flames leaping 20 feet high despite the falling snow. Months of work, precious winter feed going up in smoke. Clara's hands shook with rage and fear in equal measure. Then she heard the horses. They emerged from the darkness on 3 sides, 8 riders, maybe 10, surrounding them in a loose semicircle. Clara recognized some faces from town, Garrett's ranch hands, but Garrett himself wasn't among them. Of course not. He'd sent others to do his dirty work. The man who'd visited before, the one who'd delivered Garrett's business proposal, sat his horse at the center of the group, a torch in one hand. Evening, Hale. Mrs. Hale? His voice carried over the crackle of flames. Hell of a fire. Shame about all that hay. You're trespassing, Ethan said quietly. His rifle was raised, aimed at the speaker. And you're destroying property. That's criminal. Is it? I don't see us destroying anything. Just riding past, saw the fire, came to help. The man's smile was vicious. Of course, we could help more if there was some cooperation, if certain stubborn folks were more reasonable about selling land they can't defend. The land's not for sale. Everything's for sale at the right price, Hale. Question is whether you want to negotiate now, while you still have a farm left to sell, or later after there's nothing but ash. Clara felt Ethan tense beside her, felt the moment when his patience ran out, when the careful restraint he'd maintained for weeks finally snapped. You want my answer? Ethan's voice dropped to something cold and deadly. Here it is. You and your men turn around right now and ride back to Garrett. Tell him this land isn't for sale at any price. Tell him if he sends anyone else to threaten or destroy or intimidate, I won't be polite anymore. And tell him that I've killed better men than him for less cause. The silence that followed was absolute except for the roar of burning hay. That a threat? The ranch hand's smile faltered. That's a promise. Now get off our land. For a long moment, no one moved. Clara's finger rested on the rifle trigger, her heart hammering so hard she thought they must hear it. 8 against 2. Maybe 10. Terrible odds if this turned into a gunfight. But Ethan stood like a statue, his rifle steady, his eyes flat and cold. And something in his stance, in the absolute certainty of his willingness to follow through, made the ranch hands hesitate. The lead rider's horse shifted nervously. You're making a mistake, Hale. Maybe. But it's my mistake to make. Another long pause. Then the ranch hand spat in the snow and wheeled his horse. Let's go, boys. Let's the fool burn with his hay. They rode off into the darkness, torch flames bobbing like malevolent fireflies. Clara and Ethan stood frozen until the sound of hooves faded completely. Then Clara's legs gave out. She sank into the snow, rifle falling from nerveless hands, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Ethan was beside her instantly, his arm around her shoulders. It's over. They're gone. The hay, Clara whispered. Months of work. The cattle. We can't feed them through winter without... We'll figure it out. Ethan's voice was steady, grounding. Right now we need to make sure the fire doesn't spread. Come on. He pulled her to her feet, and together they worked through the night. There wasn't enough water to put out the hay fire, so they dug fire breaks in the snow, clearing everything combustible from a wide radius. By the time dawn broke gray and cold, the hay was nothing but smoldering ash. But the fire hadn't spread to the barn or fences. Small mercies. They trudged back to the house in exhausted silence. Clara made coffee with shaking hands while Ethan stared out the window, his jaw tight with barely contained rage. I should ride to Garrett's ranch, he said finally. End this now. And do what? Shoot him? Clara's voice was sharp with fear. That's murder, Ethan. They'd hang you. He burned your winter feed, left you cattle to starve or sell at a loss. That's not just intimidation anymore. That's destruction of livelihood. I know what it is. Clara slammed her coffee cup down hard enough to crack it. I know exactly what he's doing. But if you go after him with a gun, you become the criminal, not him. You give Morrison exactly what he needs to arrest you, and then where am I? Alone again, and you dead or in prison. Ethan turned to face her, and the pain in his eyes stopped her anger cold. I can't just let him destroy everything you've worked for, Clara. Can't stand by while he takes pieces of you bit by bit. You're not standing by. You're here. You faced down 10 armed men last night without firing a shot. You've made it clear this land is protected. Clara crossed to him, gripping his arms. But we have to be smart. We have to think. About what? He's not going to stop? No, but maybe we don't need him to stop. Maybe we just need to make it impossible for him to win. Ethan frowned. What are you thinking? Clara's mind raced, pieces falling into place. Garrett wants this land because it controls water access to his range. But he can't just take it. There's legal process, community scrutiny. He's been trying to force me to sell or drive me away so it looks legitimate. Right. So? So what if we make it completely clear the land will never be for sale? What if we make our claim so public, so documented, so witnessed that there's no legal path for him to acquire it? Clara's voice gained strength. We file papers in town. We get the deed recorded with witnesses. We make sure everyone knows this farm belongs to Hale family now, legally married and jointly owned, and that we're planning to expand, to build, to make it permanent. Ethan was quiet, thinking it through. That blocks him from buying it easy, but it doesn't stop him from burning us out. No, but it makes it riskier. Right now we're isolated, easy targets. But what if we weren't? Clara pulled away, pacing. What if we threw a barn raising? Invited every neighbor within 20 miles to come help build a new hay barn. Bigger, better, fireproof. Get the whole community invested in our success. You think people would come? I think people don't like bullies, even when they're scared of them. And I think watching you stand up to Garrett has made them remember that. Clara met his eyes. We make ourselves part of the community in a way Garrett can't ignore and can't attack without turning everyone against him. Slowly, Ethan began to nod. Ethan, it's smart. It's not violence, but it's still fighting back. Exactly. But Clara, a barn raising takes money, materials, food to feed helpers. After losing the hay, can you afford it? Clara thought of the credit at the bank, the small savings she had left. Barely, if we're careful. Then we use what I have saved, the money James left me beyond the mortgage. Ethan held up a hand when she started to protest. This is my fight now too, our fight. Let me help. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to maintain that this was still her farm, her burden. But looking at Ethan's determined face, at the man who'd stood between her and 10 armed riders without flinching, she realized the truth. This had stopped being just her fight weeks ago. All right, she said quietly. Together. They rode to town that morning despite exhaustion, despite the smoking ruin behind them. At the county recorder's office, they filed updated deed papers showing joint ownership. At the general store, they purchased materials for a barn. At the post office, Clara wrote notices for the barn raising and asked Mrs. Henderson to help spread the word. Word spread fast. By afternoon, promises of help were coming in. Reverend Michaels pledged to bring his congregation. 3 neighboring farms committed tools and labor. Even Mr. Cooper from the bank stopped by to offer lumber at cost. That's mighty generous of you, Ethan said carefully. Cooper shrugged. Thomas Garrett's been throwing his weight around this county for too long. About time someone stood up to him. Can't do much myself, but I can sell you lumber cheap. They set the barn raising for the following Saturday, giving them 5 days to prepare. Those 5 days passed in a blur of work, clearing the old barn site, setting foundation posts, organizing materials. Clara cooked constantly, preparing food to feed the helpers who'd promised to come. And every night they kept watch, waiting for Garrett's response. It came on Friday evening, not armed men this time, but Garrett himself, riding up alone as the sun set. Clara and Ethan met him in the yard. Ethan's rifle was propped against the porch rail, visible but not held, a statement of readiness without aggression. Garrett. Ethan's voice was flat. Hale, Mrs. Hale. Garrett dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate. Heard you're planning a barn raising tomorrow. Big community event. That's right. Also heard you're making claims about arson, about my men burning your hay. Garrett's face was hard as granite. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. You got proof? Witnesses? Or just assumptions? Garrett stepped closer. Because if you're going around slandering my good name without evidence, that's a problem. Your men were on my property the night my hay burned. Multiple witnesses saw them. Ethan's voice never rose, never heated, just stayed cold and factual. But you're right. I can't prove they set the fire. Just like you can't prove they didn't. Then we got nothing to discuss. Actually, we do. Ethan descended the porch steps, closing the distance until he stood directly in front of Garrett. We need to discuss what happens next, because this ends tomorrow, one way or another. Garrett's eyes narrowed. That a threat? No. It's reality. Tomorrow, half the county's coming to help us build a barn. They're going to see this farm thriving despite your attempts to destroy it. They're going to see a community rallying around people you've tried to intimidate. Ethan's voice dropped lower, harder. And you're going to have to decide. Do you back off and accept that this land isn't yours? Or do you escalate in front of witnesses who'll testify against you? You're awful confident for a man who doesn't know me. I know you well enough. I know bullies. I know men who use money and fear instead of courage. Ethan's smile was cold. And I know that men like you fold when someone finally pushes back hard enough. For a long, terrible moment, Clara thought Garrett would pull his gun. His hand twitched toward his hip, his face flushing with rage. Then he laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. You got sand, Hale. I'll give you that. He turned back to his horse, swinging into the saddle. But sand doesn't stop bullets, remember that. He rode off into the gathering dark, and Clara released a breath she'd been holding for what felt like hours. That wasn't him backing down, she said quietly. No, that was him declaring war. Ethan watched Garrett disappear. He'll come tomorrow, during the barn raising, with enough men to make a statement. You think he'd attack in front of the whole community? I think he's desperate enough and angry enough to try. He'll frame it differently, claim we owe him money, or stole his cattle or something. But yeah, I think he's coming. Clara's stomach churned with fear. Then we need to be ready. They spent the evening preparing. Ethan cleaned and loaded every gun on the property. Clara positioned water buckets around the new barn site in case of fire. They talked through scenarios, made plans, prepared for violence they both hoped wouldn't come. That night, neither of them slept. Saturday dawned clear and cold, the sky a hard blue dome overhead. People started arriving mid-morning, wagons loaded with tools and supplies, families bringing covered dishes, men ready to work. Within an hour, the farm was swarming with activity. Clara moved through the crowd, thanking people, directing food to tables, overwhelmed by the outpouring. Mrs. Henderson had brought half the church women, all armed with hammers and determination. Reverend Michaels led a prayer before work began. Even young couples Clara barely knew had come to help. The community showing up. Work progressed rapidly with so many hands. The barn frame went up in sections, men calling out instructions, wood ringing under hammers. Children ran between workers, carrying nails and water. Women assembled food on makeshift tables. It felt like celebration and defiance mixed together. Ethan stayed alert, watching the road, his rifle never far from reach. But he also worked, lifting beams, securing joints, earning respect through labor. Clara watched him fit into the community in a way she'd never expected. Easy with the men, respectful to the women, patient with curious children. This was who he'd wanted to become, who James had believed he could be. The attack came near noon, when work was at its peak. 15 riders came up the road in formation, Garrett at their head. They stopped at the property line, a wall of men and horses and visible weapons. Work stuttered to a halt. Hammers stopped mid-swing. Conversations died. Everyone turned to watch. Ethan walked forward slowly, deliberately, stopping in the yard. Clara moved to stand beside him, and after a moment's hesitation, Reverend Michaels joined them. Then Mr. Cooper. Then 3 of the neighboring ranchers. A wall of their own, standing together. Garrett surveyed the scene, the half-built barn, the crowd of witnesses, the community gathered in support. His expression darkened. "Hale," he called out. "You owe me compensation for cattle that strayed onto your land and weren't returned, 200 head at market value." The lie was so blatant Clara nearly laughed, but Ethan just shook his head. "No cattle have been on this property except our own. You know it. Everyone here knows it." "You calling me a liar?" "I'm saying you're mistaken. And even if cattle had strayed here, That's not worth 15 armed men. Ethan's voice carried across the yard. This isn't about cattle, Garrett. This is about you trying to intimidate good people into giving up land you want but can't buy. The hell it is. Those cattle don't exist. Reverend Michaels stepped forward, his usually gentle voice firm. Thomas, I've known you 20 years. I've overlooked a lot because you're a powerful man in this county, but I won't stand by while you threaten decent people with false accusations. Stay out of this, Reverend. This is between me and Hale. No, sir, it's not. One of the neighboring ranchers spoke up, old Ben Tucker, who'd ranched this territory for 40 years. It's between you and all of us. Because if you can do this to the Hales, you can do it to any of us, and we're tired of being scared. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Clara saw Garrett's men shifting uncomfortably, suddenly aware they were outnumbered 3-1 by angry neighbors. Garrett's face flushed deep red. You're all making a mistake. This man, he jabbed a finger at Ethan, he's not who you think. He's a gunfighter, a killer. Ask him about Kansas. Ask him about the men he's shot. Clara felt Ethan go rigid beside her, felt the weight of his past crashing into his present. You're right, Ethan said quietly, and the admission rippled through the crowd like shock. I have killed men. In Kansas and other places. I'm not proud of it. I've spent years trying to become someone better. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was steady, honest. But I've never killed anyone who didn't draw first. Never hurt anyone who wasn't trying to hurt me or someone I was protecting. And I came here to build, not destroy, to work honest land with honest labor, to keep a promise to a dying friend. Ethan's gaze swept the crowd. You don't have to trust me, but look at what we've built here, Clara and me together. Look at this barn going up with your help. That's who I'm trying to be now. Not the man I was, the man I could become. The silence that followed was profound. Then Mrs. Henderson's voice cut through it, sharp and determined. Well, I, for one, think we've had enough talking. We've got a barn to build. Thomas Garrett, you can either help or get out of the way, but you're not stopping us. She turned her back on him deliberately and picked up her hammer. One by one, others turned back to work. Hammers rang out again. Voices rose. The barn raising resumed. Garrett sat his horse, visibly shaking with rage, outmaneuvered and humiliated in front of the entire community. His men looked at him, waiting for orders. For one terrible moment, Clara thought he'd give the order to attack anyway. Thought this would end in blood after all. Then Garrett jerked his horse's reins and rode off without a word. His men followed, leaving only dust and defeat behind. Clara's knees nearly buckled with relief. Ethan caught her elbow, steadying her. It's over, he said softly. He can't come back from this. Not without making himself an outcast. You think he'll accept it? No, but he doesn't have a choice anymore. The community's seen who we are and who he is. That verdict won't change. Work continued through the afternoon with renewed energy, as if everyone was celebrating victory through labor. The barn took shape under skilled hands, solid, strong, built to last. By evening, the frame was complete, walls raised, roof begun. People stayed for dinner, sharing food and stories, turning the day into impromptu festival. Children played in the snow. Men discussed next year's planting. Women traded recipes and gossip. Clara moved through it all in a daze, accepting congratulations, thanking helpers, hardly believing it was real. When she found a quiet moment, she stood by the new barn and let herself feel the weight of what had happened. They'd won, not through violence, but through community, through standing together. Ethan found her there as the sun set, painting the snow in shades of gold and rose. You did it, he said. Your plan worked. We did it. Together. Clara looked at him, this man who'd stepped off a train 6 weeks ago and changed everything. Thank you, Ethan, for staying, for fighting, for being exactly what we needed. His expression was complicated. Gratitude and sorrow mixed together. I should tell you something. About Kansas. About the men I killed. You don't have to. I do. You deserve the whole truth. Ethan stared out at the mountains, his voice distant. I rode with some bad men for a few years. Thought I was justified. They'd killed my family, burned our farm. I wanted revenge, got it too, but it didn't feel like I thought it would. Just felt empty. He paused, and Clara waited, giving him space. I kept riding with them anyway. Did things I'm not proud of. Hurt people who didn't deserve it. Became exactly what I'd been fighting against. His voice roughened. Then I met James. He was treating a man I'd shot, not killed, just wounded. He looked at me and said, "You can keep being this, or you can choose different, but you have to choose." And you chose different. Tried to. Failed a lot at first. But James never gave up on me. Kept saying I could be redeemed if I did the work. Ethan finally looked at her. That's why I came here, Clara. Not just to honor a promise, but to prove he was right. That I could be someone worth redemption. Clara reached out and took his hand. You are. You proved it today, and every day before. You've been honorable and kind and brave. That's who you are now. Because of you. Because of this place. His fingers tightened around hers. I came here planning to leave in spring, but Clara, I don't want to leave. I want to stay. Not because of a promise to James, but because this feels like home. You feel like... He stopped, and Clara's heart hammered in her chest. Like what? She whispered. Like someone I could build a real life with. If you'd want that. If you could see me as more than just hired help. Clara looked at him, really looked, and saw past the gun and the ghosts to the man underneath. The man who'd fixed her roof and defended her land and stood between her and violence without hesitation. The man who'd taught her to shoot and shared her watches and slowly, carefully, become essential. I stopped seeing you as hired help weeks ago, she admitted. I just didn't know what else to call you. Call me your husband, for real this time. Not a legal arrangement, but an actual partnership. Ethan's voice was rough with hope and fear. If you'll have me. Clara thought about James Mackenzie, the man she'd never met but who'd somehow given her exactly what she needed. Thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, from desperation to determination to something that felt surprisingly like joy. Yes, she said simply. I'll have you. Ethan pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and Clara leaned into the embrace. Around them, the celebration continued, neighbors laughing, children playing, the barn standing solid against the darkening sky. The farm that had been her prison had become her home again. The marriage that had been survival had become choice. And the stranger with cold eyes had become the man she trusted with everything. Spring would come eventually, but when it did, Ethan wouldn't be leaving. He'd already come home. The barn was finished 2 days later. It stood tall and proud, visible for miles, a testament to community and stubbornness and love built out of necessity and made real through choice. Garrett never came back. Within a month, Clara heard he'd sold his ranch and moved to Montana, unable to face the community that had rejected him. Sheriff Morrison left too, quietly, in the night. New people came. Better people. The territory was changing, growing, becoming something different from the rough frontier it had been. And through it all, Clara and Ethan worked the farm together, not as strangers bound by contract, but as partners bound by choice. They planted in spring, harvested in fall, survived another hard winter wrapped in the warmth they'd built together. On their first anniversary, they stood on the porch watching the sun set over land they'd defended and earned. Clara wore the ring James had bought and Ethan had given her. Ethan wore his, no longer a symbol of obligation, but of belonging. Think James would approve? Clara asked. Ethan considered it, then smiled, a real smile, warm and unguarded. Yeah, I think he'd be happy knowing his plan worked even better than he hoped. His plan was just to get you here. The rest we did ourselves. True, Ethan pulled her closer. Guess we're better at this partnership than either of us expected. Clara leaned into him, watching their land stretch out in the gathering dark. Somewhere on the hill behind the house, 3 generations of Whitmores rested beside James Mackenzie, who they'd buried there in the spring with full honors. He'd never worked this land, never met the woman who'd loved his letters, never seen the barn raised in community or the marriage he'd arranged become real. But his gift remained. His sacrifice mattered. His belief in second chances had given 2 broken people a path toward healing. The wrong man had stepped off that train 6 months ago, but somehow, impossibly, he'd become exactly the right man to stay.